The evening sun dipped lower behind the estate's towering walls, bathing everything in a soft amber glow that gave the marble floor a golden shimmer. The grand living room, with its chandeliers and polished mirrors, buzzed with life. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns moved like colorful fish in an elegant aquarium, their laughter rising and falling with the notes of a piano that played softly in the background. Crystal glasses clinked, champagne bubbled, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same subject: Daniel, the young heir whose success in business had only added to his already inherited fortune. Tonight was as much a celebration of his engagement as it was of his place among the wealthy elite. At the center of it all, Daniel stood tall and confident, his dark suit tailored perfectly to his frame, his smile easy and practiced. Beside him was Claire, his fiancée, dressed in a gown that shimmered like liquid silver under the chandeliers. Her laughter was light, her gestures graceful, and she seemed born for such a stage. Together, they were the golden couple everyone wanted to admire, the promise of a new dynasty built not just on wealth but on charm and appearances. But in the corner of the room, away from the spotlight, Eleanor sat quietly in a high-backed chair. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, her dress simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. Though she had been introduced proudly as Daniel's mother earlier, most guests had quickly forgotten her presence, preferring to bask in the radiance of youth and glamour. She sat watching, her eyes soft but tired, her hands resting on her lap. Occasionally, she would lift a glass of water Claire had given her, sipping slowly, her thin fingers trembling slightly with the effort. Her arms felt heavier than they had that morning, the kind of dull ache that no one else noticed but she could not ignore. She tried to hide it, straightening in her chair, forcing her lips into a faint smile whenever someone glanced her way. But the room was a blur of movement and noise, and no one looked long enough to see past the mask. Claire, however, approached briefly between conversations. She leaned down, her perfume strong and sweet, and asked lightly, "Are you all right, Eleanor? Do you need anything?" Her tone was polite, but her eyes were already scanning the room, searching for the next handshake, the next compliment. Eleanor tried to smile, lifting the glass in her frail hands. "I'm fine, dear," she murmured. But when Claire turned to leave, Eleanor whispered, almost too softly, "My arms are tired." Claire paused, the words catching her by surprise. She looked down at the older woman, unsure what to say. Eleanor's hands trembled against the glass, her knuckles pale. For a moment, Claire considered taking it from her, but the thought of anyone noticing, of guests whispering about an old woman who couldn't hold a simple glass, made her hesitate. She bent closer, her voice low. "Don't make a scene, please. Everyone's watching." The words stung Eleanor more than she expected. She had not wanted attention, only a little relief, a gesture of kindness. She tried again, her voice trembling. "Could you just hold it for me? My arms, they feel so heavy." Her plea was sincere, stripped of all pride, but Claire only gave a tight smile and a quick pat on her hand before slipping back into the crowd, her laughter floating toward Daniel and his circle of admirers. Eleanor's chest tightened, not from anger but from the deep ache of invisibility. She had once been the center of Daniel's world, the one who stayed awake through his fevers, who worked tirelessly to keep their home together after her husband's passing. Now she was just a shadow at the edge of his success, a quiet presence in a room too loud to hear her. Her fingers grew weaker, and the glass wobbled dangerously. She tried to steady it against her lap, but the weight was too much. In one heartbreaking instant, it slipped from her grasp and shattered on the marble floor. The crash rang louder than any music, louder than any laughter. The room fell silent, every eye turning toward the fragile figure in the corner. Eleanor froze, her face burning as the broken shards reflected the light around her. She whispered again, this time her voice carrying further than before, trembling with both exhaustion and humiliation, "My arms are tired. Would you like me to expand scene 2 in the same detailed 700-word style as well?" The sharp sound of breaking glass lingered in the silence like an accusation. Daniel's laughter, once booming at the center of the crowd, died instantly. His head snapped toward the corner of the room, and his eyes fell on his mother, slumped slightly in her chair, her hands trembling and empty. For a heartbeat, he did not move. He could only stare at the sight of her frail body, her shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight no one else could see. Then, with sudden urgency, he pushed through the crowd. The guests parted instinctively, whispers rising like a wave behind him. He reached her side in moments, his polished shoes crunching against the shards of glass. Kneeling beside her chair, he gently took her cold, thin hands into his own. "Mother," his voice broke, the practiced composure of the millionaire replaced by something raw and unguarded. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? Why didn't you say something?" His dark eyes searched hers, desperate for an answer. Eleanor lifted her gaze slowly, her lips trembling as tears welled in her tired eyes. "I did, Daniel," she whispered weakly. "I told Claire, but she—" Her words faltered as her eyes flickered toward the fiancé standing nearby. Claire's cheeks flushed crimson under the weight of so many stares. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her glittering clutch bag as though it could shield her from the judgment pressing in from all sides. Daniel's expression hardened, his eyes snapping to Claire. "You knew." His voice was low, dangerous, yet filled with disbelief. "She told you she needed help, and you ignored her." The accusation struck like a blade, cutting through the fragile surface of the celebration. Claire opened her mouth, fumbling for words. "I didn't mean to, I just thought." "You thought what?" Daniel's voice rose, carrying across the hushed room. "That her dignity was less important than your image. That asking for kindness was something to brush aside." The disappointment in his tone was sharper than anger, and it pinned Claire in place. She stammered, "I didn't want her to feel embarrassed in front of everyone. I thought if she just waited." Daniel cut her off, his voice steady but unyielding. "Compassion doesn't wait. When someone you love is struggling, you don't worry about what others will think. You help them. That's what family is." His words echoed in the grand hall, heavy with conviction. The guests shifted uneasily, some lowering their eyes, others nodding faintly as though reminded of something long forgotten. Eleanor's tears spilled freely now. She leaned against her son's shoulder, her body trembling not just from weakness but from the release of years of silent endurance. For so long she had carried her fragility alone, masking it in order not to burden him. To hear him defend her, to see him put her above the glittering spectacle of wealth, filled her heart with both sorrow and pride. Daniel cradled her gently, his hand supporting the back of her head, his other arm steadying her frail frame. "You'll never have to plead again," he murmured, his voice soft but firm, meant only for her ears. "Not while I'm here." She clutched his sleeve weakly, nodding, her voice barely a breath. "You were always strong, Daniel. I just didn't want to make you worry." He kissed her forehead gently, his jaw tight with restrained emotion. "You are the reason I am strong. Don't ever think I don't want to carry you, Mother." Claire tried once more to step forward, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "Daniel, please, I didn't mean harm. I thought I was doing the right thing." But her words sounded hollow, stripped of conviction. Daniel turned his head slowly, his gaze steady and cold. "Kindness doesn't need excuses, Claire. And tonight, you showed me exactly what matters most to you." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared to break it. Guests stood frozen, unsure whether to slip away or witness what felt like the unmasking of truth. For many of them, wealth had always been the measure of success. But in this moment, they saw something greater. A son kneeling on the floor in front of his mother, surrounded by shards of broken glass, unafraid to put love and loyalty above pride and appearances. Eleanor rested her head against Daniel's chest, her breathing steadier now that she no longer fought her exhaustion alone. She closed her eyes, feeling for the first time in years like she was not an afterthought but the center of her son's world. And Daniel, holding her as though she were the most precious thing he owned, knew deep in his heart that no amount of money, no diamond, no business victory could ever compare to this moment of truth. Would you like me to expand scene 3 the same way, 700 words, emotional, and detailed? The last of the cars rolled down the long driveway, their headlights vanishing into the night until the estate was swallowed by silence. The echoes of laughter, clinking glasses, and polite chatter faded, leaving behind an almost sacred stillness. Inside the mansion, the grand chandeliers still glowed, but the air felt different, less celebratory, more reflective. Daniel carried his mother upstairs himself, ignoring the staff who offered to help. He insisted, his strong arms cradling her fragile body as though she were made of porcelain. Each step was deliberate, protective, and filled with the kind of tenderness that only comes from love. Eleanor nestled weakly against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Though her body ached, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She could hear his heartbeat beneath his chest, steady and strong, and it reminded her of the nights when he was a little boy, frightened of thunderstorms, clinging to her until he fell asleep. Now the roles were reversed. Her son was her protector, her shield. By the time they reached her bedroom, her eyes brimmed with tears, though she tried to hide them behind a weary smile. Daniel laid her gently on the bed, adjusting the pillows behind her back and pulling the soft blanket up to her chest. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face, his movements unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. "Rest now, mother," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You won't have to lift a thing again. From this moment forward, I'll carry it all, for you." Her thin fingers reached for his hand, clutching it with surprising strength. "You're still my little boy," she whispered, her voice raspy but filled with warmth. "Even as a millionaire, you'll always be my Daniel. I never needed riches, only this, your love." Her eyes closed briefly, and a peaceful sigh escaped her lips. He sat beside her until her breathing steadied, the rise and fall of her chest calming the storm that raged in his heart. Downstairs, Claire stood alone in the vast living room, staring at the remnants of the evening. The shattered glass had been swept away by the staff, but the memory of the sound still rang in her ears. The marble floor gleamed as always, yet to her it felt fractured, like the reflection she caught in it, her face divided into sharp, broken pieces. She clutched her diamond bracelet, the symbol of her engagement, but instead of pride it now felt like a chain. She replayed the moment again and again, the elderly woman's quiet plea, her own hesitation, the shameful words she had whispered, "Don't make a scene." How easily she had chosen appearance over compassion. The weight of that choice pressed down on her, heavier than any jewel could. When Daniel returned, his face was pale from exhaustion but resolute, his jaw set in a way that made Claire's heart pound with dread. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his eyes cool and distant. "Claire," he began, his tone calm yet final, "tonight I saw something I can't ignore." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. He continued, his voice firm, "I can forgive mistakes in business, in judgment, even in love. But not in compassion. If you cannot respect my mother, then you cannot be my wife." The sentence fell between them like a gavel striking wood. Claire's lips parted, her breath catching in her throat. "Daniel, please, I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought I was protecting her dignity." She tried to step closer, but he held his ground. "Protecting her dignity," his voice grew sharper. "Dignity is not leaving a woman to suffer alone. Dignity is holding her hand when her arms are tired. If you can't do that, what kind of partner could you ever be to me?" Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to smudge the carefully applied makeup that had sparkled under the chandeliers just hours earlier. For the first time in her life, she realized that beauty and wealth meant nothing when measured against kindness. The glitter on her dress felt hollow, the diamonds on her wrist worthless. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his steady stare. She knew, even before he spoke again, that the engagement was over. Daniel's voice softened slightly, but his decision was clear. "It's not about me, Claire. It's about her, the woman who gave everything so I could stand here today. If you cannot honor her, then you cannot honor us." With that, he turned away, leaving her standing alone in a room that suddenly felt unbearably empty. Upstairs, Eleanor stirred faintly in her sleep. Though she had not heard the words exchanged below, she felt their weight in her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that she would no longer be invisible, no longer carry her burdens in silence. Her son's promise echoed in her dreams, "You'll never have to plead again." She smiled faintly, her tired arms finally at rest, not because they had grown strong again, but because her son had taken the weight from them. And in that quiet room, under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, an elderly mother drifted into peaceful slumber, secure in the love of the boy who had once needed her and now had grown strong enough to carry her in return. Do you also want me to craft cinematic image prompts for each scene so the story can be visualized like a drama still?